36. Destiny gave a battle cry and charged toward the oncoming troops as if she'd take them all on herself. Although I worked up a shout to stave off her attack, an elf leapt through the portal on the opposite side. Then another. A moment later, a familiar arachnid and a silver-furred wolf burst through, followed by their master. Brugh was next. More elves flooded out after him, and I spied the commander of the Queen's Guard hustling to catch up with the Michonne. Machini and Liatra brought up the rear. I twirled my swords as golden text flashed in the top center of my HUD, then faded. Advanced targeting engaged. You may now target up to 5 enemies and flag them in the order you wish to attack. Flagged enemies within 200 yards will appear as red numbers on your map. A new window brought an invitation. Destiny Share has invited you to a raid. Would you like to add your party members to the raid? I nodded, then a row of tiny faces filled the left side of my HUD with health indicators and the appropriate resource pool meters for their classes. No sooner had the raid been formed than Bellows charged. A few steps into his sprint, he launched skyward to cut the distance between us. In one fluid motion, he landed, then punched forward with both hands. I slid to one side, just avoiding a double thrust with his sai. He crouched, then spun with both weapons extended at arm's length. I dipped too, then raised my swords and swung them hard. Metal clanked and sparks flew as his spin came to an abrupt halt. The word parry appeared over his head, then floated skyward. One foot planted in the mud. I raised the other, then kicked. My heel caught his solar plexus flush. He coughed the wind from his lungs as he wheeled backward, then dropped to his ass with a splat. Not gonna be so easy for you without a huge level advantage, is it? Beyond him, Brugh wheeled in search of a target, his face red with rage as he launched 10 yards through the air, then landed to send a shockwave in all directions. Bellows shoved 2 muddy fingers between his lips to sound a shrill whistle. 2 enemies evaded the melee and appeared on either side of the portal. One wore full silver plate, the other was a bare-chested warrior with 5 of the tattooed stripes on his shoulder and chest. They each offered a hand, then pulled Bellows to his feet before the trio faced me. 1 of ya, 3 of ya. I twirled the swords again. Makes little difference to me, bitches. I kissed the air. Bring it. The tallest one scurried forward from the left as Bellows twirled his sai and tiptoed forward. The one on the right came around in a wide circle. It didn't take a genius to see they planned to form the points of a triangle and attack me like hyenas would an elderly lion. But one of my new teammates had other plans. An arrow pierced the neck of the one on the right, then Sumi charged into view with her bow in one hand. The soldier left the arrow in as he whipped his sword in her direction to fend her off. And then there were 2. I raised my katanas. Tenkasuru! The blades just beyond the hilts burst into flames that tore up the shafts until they reached the tip. Undeterred, Bellows and the bare-chested warrior charged. I swung one sword in a low to high arc on my left. Golden text flashed in my field of vision. Inazuma! A finger of lightning shot from the blade, then slammed into the warrior's bare chest. He lumbered backward, raised one hand to his head, then shook it off as if to clear the cobwebs. Green lettering popped up above him, then floated skyward. Stunned. Bellows twisted to one side, dipped low, then twirled to bring his weapons around. Although I'd expected him to swing left and across his chest, he'd instead spun the opposite direction to conceal the arc of his weapons. I dodged the first, but the second slashed through my armor and the blade sliced open my chin. Red text flashed large, then faded. Minus 84 HP. Minus 21 HP. Bleed. Minus 19 HP. Bleed. His hand swept in a blurry backswing to bring his sai around for another strike, but I thrust out one katana and sliced his wrist. One weapon splashed into a puddle, but the other punctured my chest armor, then slid between my ribs. I howled with pain. My knees buckled, then my ass hit the soft ground. One katana dropped away when I slapped my dominant hand to cover the wound. Minus 123 HP. Minus 35 HP. Bleed. If I'd worn my higher-level armor, the strikes might never have penetrated, but this was the hand I'd been dealt. The bare-chested warrior slipped around Bellows as if he wasn't there. He brought up a studded club to pound my face to mush, but another arrow sailed through the air and lodged into his chest. His chin dipped as he eyed the projectile, then his chin turned toward the far stands. But by the time he spotted Amelia Horn, another arrow crossed the distance and drove through the center of his face. Despite the impact, he fell forward, lodging the implements of his death deeper. Bellows and I both cringed and uttered, "Oh!" But my enemy was on his feet, and I still sat in the mud. The martialist pressed his advantage.
"One way or the other, you're going through that portal, Fowler."
He dove, but I rolled onto my back, cocked my leg, then kicked with all the force I could muster. My foot hit his midsection with a solid blow, and his momentum carried him over. Despite the shocks of pain radiating from my ribs into my chest, I rolled to my knees when he splashed down. Bellows rolled onto his belly, coughed, then sucked air, and pushed himself halfway up. I swept my remaining sword in a shallow arc across his face. "Rostin Bellows, minus 64 HP. When I brought my weapon around in a backswing, he threw up his sigh and deflected it. "Parry." I twisted the katana so it slid between the two blades of his martial weapon, then flicked it away. But in the process, I lost my grip on the hilt and my sword went with it. He might have the advantage in hand-to-hand combat, but wrenching his weapon free left his torso exposed. So I lunged, wrapped my arms around his waist, and tackled him. I struggled upright. With my knees straddling his chest, I brought up a fist and struck. The first punch landed, but when I brought my offhand around, my ribs shocked me in protest and I cowered against the pain. Bello chopped me in the neck with a knife hand that both stunned me and sent me tumbling to the side. The world spun around. A warm sensation rolled over me. Charney casts Flash Heal, plus 31 HP. Charney casts Minor Heal, plus 11 HP, hot, plus 11 HP, hot. Despite losing more health per second than he could restore via his restoration spells, the goblin staunched my bleeding. At that pace, he'd deplete his mana. But with each tick of the healing over time effect, the muscles surrounding my ribs loosened. Bellows lay a few feet away as we both faced skyward, with our chests heaving.
"You ready to come quietly?"
"Fuck you."
"So be it."
He rolled toward me, but I twisted in the opposite direction, and pushed myself up with one arm as the other cupped my wound. Metal and wood collided in the sounds of war around us as my boots splashed in mud and puddles. By the time I gathered the katana closest to me, Bellows was back on his feet wielding both of his weapons. My second sword lay beyond him. I gasped.
"Tenkasuru!"
The long blade burst into flames. I beckoned him with the fingers of my other hand as another warm heal enveloped me. A moment later, a radiant angelic form swept by and I was cast in a golden glow. Then Liatra's minion whipped around and charged back into the fray on the other side of the portal. Bellows charged. Before he could close the distance, I spun low twice in succession, then planted my feet and lunged to stab the air before him. 2 of the 3 resource pools that fed my elemental abilities ticked down. Rapid Dotsutsuto, Rapid Twist, plus 1 air charge, minus 20 Kaze. Rapid Dotsutsuto, Rapid Twist, plus 1 air charge, minus 20 Kaze. Esushirudo, plus 1 water charge, minus 30 Mizu. Ice Shield activated. In a feat of agility, the martialist leapt over the attack, bent one leg at the knee as he shot skyward, then shoved the other toward me in a vicious sidekick. His foot impacted my ice shield and, although the magic barrier mitigated the damage, I stumbled backward and almost lost my balance. Bellows feinted with a sigh, then brought around an elbow strike. I coughed as it landed flush with my belly. His blurry motion continued when he brought the weapon in his offhand around, but I ducked, then shoved the tip of my katana into his hip. He reeled, stumbling away. 5 golden halos lit the ground around me, then the mud split open and mushrooms popped. Golden motes puffed from them at intervals. Life Shrooms. Charney. Plus 19 HP. Hot. Plus 19 HP. Hot. Plus 27 HP. Hot. Critical. Bellows and I faced each other, our chests rising and falling in desperate gasps. The wound in my ribs had stopped bleeding at some point, but the pain remained. Bellows set the side of a fist, gripping his sigh against the gash in his hip. Our eyes shot skyward when an eardrum-rumbling, shrill cry filled the arena. The distant massive doors slammed open as if an unseen giant punched them. A shadowy figure dressed in black from head to toe stood with its face turned down to show the top of its fitted cap, the tattered black tails of a robe hovering inches off the ground. The woman's arms rose, then she shot skyward to levitate over the edges of the structure. Soon, others who'd gone unseen rose and joined ranks in the sky. We were surrounded. 37. I wheeled in a circle, spying the high-flying horrors, then double-clutched my swords. The dark image at the door threw both arms out, then swept them forward toward the open terrain where the fighting had ceased. The figures surrounding us zipped over the walls, then down toward the center. Their hands whipped forth, sending fingers of lightning, torrents of fire, and shards of ice that cut trails in the muddy ground. Bellows and I dropped to our knees with our arms covering our ears against the shrill screams. A body thumped to the earth before me with ice shards protruding from eye sockets. A streak of fire whipped along the ground beyond as it burned its trail toward me. My legs tensed in preparation to roll away, but I was too late. I flexed every muscle in preparation for the pain, but the fire passed right over me. What the fuck? The howling ceased. I lowered my arms, then scanned the turmoil surrounding me. The low figures in ragged black garments sped around, cutting down the king's troops with abandon. Faces melted. Eyes popped like soap bubbles. A woman warrior with flowing red hair spun up in a cyclone, surged skyward, then slammed down with such force her body folded backward when her spine snapped. Brutal. I'll never know how I heard the footsteps over chaos's cacophony, but I wheeled just in time to spy the incoming swing of a sigh and dodged to the side. Hopping to my feet, I pivoted, juked left, then evaded another incoming strike. Your dodge skill has reached rank 37. Rostin Bellows is frozen. Effect duration, 1 second. The effect from my slippery skill line hadn't procced since I'd dodged Underlord Kame in his stronghold, so I'd almost forgotten about it. Thus I didn't respond quickly enough to counter. Still, the AI popped the information into a separate pane on my left. Slippery, rank 1, plus 1% chance to parry or dodge melee attacks. Rank 2. Plus 3% chance to parry or dodge melee attacks. Rank 3, plus 5% chance to parry or dodge melee attacks. Bonus. If 3 points are spent in this branch, successful dodges or parries will freeze opponents for 1 second to allow for counterattacks. Counters are not automatic. While a reminder never hurt, distractions rarely helped. Rostin Bellows glared through his remaining eye as crimson squirts pulsed from the gash I'd sliced from one side of his forehead, down and across the bridge of his nose, then through the other cheek. Skin flapped when he slurred his words through a mouthful of blood.
Screw the king. Death to the Shenhua.
Bring it, motherfucker. He lunged. I parried his incoming strike with my offhand katana, dipped low, pivoted on one knee, then brought the other sword up to slice him from knee to ribs. You attack Rostin Bellows. Critical hit. Rostin Bellows, minus 227 HP. 13% health remaining. I spun, kicked his ass for good measure, then waited. When he stumbled around to face me again, I spun both my swords over the backs of the grasping hands in turn. Showmanship, ego, whatever. I'd waited for this, and the revenge I hadn't been able to take personally on the governor of Null was about to be redistributed. You should have never come for me. Bellows spat blood but couldn't speak. He lumbered forward, raised his weapon, then lunged. When I spun to one side, he froze for the fatal second that would finish him. I slid a sword into one breast and shoved until it popped out the other side. When I ripped it away, he faltered, righted himself, then fell onto his ass. His chin ticked up, then he sent a bellowing cry of frustration as if directing it to the goddess herself. Just die, asshole. A final pulse of blood geysered from the new wound. Then Rostin Bellows did exactly that. The mud splattered beneath the weight of his corpse. You have completed a legacy quest. Cutting off a hand. Rostin Bellows is a key advisor to King Latrell involving events in the East. Objective: kill Rostin Bellows. Reward: Prism of Makai. This rare artifact allows the user to teleport anywhere within 1 mile. Type: Artifact. Durability: Unbreakable. Cooldown: 24 hours. Limitation: the user cannot penetrate walls constructed by sentient beings using this artifact. 250 gold. 5,000 XP. Silence. I whipped around to find the heaving crowd of survivors, elven, human, and whatever those dark things that flew into the Colosseum-like structure had been, staring at me. Yildrin dropped to one knee, then raised his sword skyward. Dicini dipped down beside him and repeated the salute. The elves followed suit. I huffed as the adrenaline subsided and my lungs fought to refill my bloodstream with oxygen. What a game. A new window popped up. Brusaria's claim to this way portal station has been suspended. Do you wish to claim this way portal for the Fowler Foundation? I nodded in response. You have claimed a way portal for the Fowler Foundation, plus 15,000 XP. You have completed a quest, your first conquest. You captured the Greater Brusaria way portal and claimed it for the Fowler Foundation. Rewards, 15,000 XP, 1,000 gold. Fowler Foundation now holds the following conquest points. The Greater Brusaria way portal, captured. Central way portal, captured. Highlands way portal, captured. The Great Rubalian River Exchange way portal, captured. Someone had been busy. I reached down and snatched up the pair of Psy bellows left behind. Razor-sharp edges gleamed despite the black clouds overhead. By equipping Runic Psy of the Master, and since you have learned the starter class Assassin, you have discovered a new advanced combat profession. Martialist. Master of martial artists, weaponry, and vicious hand-to-hand combat skills. Martialists are an exceptionally dangerous DPS class in Enora Online. Surrounded by shadowy creatures in ragged robes who'd just wiped the area of the king's troops, I swept the martialist class details away for later review. Beneath the steady drizzle of the rain, a throat cleared, drawing all attention toward the entrance where the low figure who'd burst the massive doors off their hinges stood with blonde rivulets flowing from the sides of the hat atop her head. Priya? I slipped my new weapons into my belt, then jogged toward her. Babe! Her chin rose. Her eye slits flashed red. My interface popped a message on my screen. Priya Sky's binding to you has been broken. My heels skidded in the mud, and I had to flail my arms to keep from tumbling. My life partner's full lips parted. Her eyes glowed with flames, then they dissipated, and her features wrinkled up. Confusion touched me from our emotional connection. She shook her head furiously, then scanned her surroundings. The light faded from her eyes. When she spied me, she took a step forward. The confusion dissipated and warmth flooded my bones. I grinned. Then the emotional wave halted, vanished. The cold rain pelted my hair and face but had little to do with the chill washing over me. Your elven bond to Priya Sky has been broken. She reached down and smacked at the unfamiliar black clothing covering her torso as our eyes locked. Well, that's enough of that. My chest hitched at the sound of the strange voice emanating from her lips. It was neither the tinny sound I'd first heard beneath the dark wood, nor the low, even voice of the woman who'd once been Delphine. Recognition dawned. Horror followed. My mind reeled as Amelia's words about Priya's possible possession replayed. A slurry of thoughts fought for dominance. Her disappearance from my map, the way I detected her emotions in the smithy in Brusaria, but when I reached out, she didn't respond to the party invite. Priya reached out with both hands, then shoved them through the air. A shockwave blew through the stadium so fast it knocked us all off our feet. Stunned, I sat up, then blinked. Beyond the sheet of rain, Destiny Cher hovered in the air with her hands around her throat, kicking furiously. Priya sauntered forward with one hand extended in the Michonne's direction. Machini struggled to her feet, then dashed to her sister's aid, but Priya threw out another hand and torrents of flame enveloped the Michonne. Her screams filled the air as Destiny tumbled to the ground, dead. Priya threw up both hands. Then a darker cloud than the rest appeared about 20 yards from the ground. Pellets of ice rained down. Although I was out of range, the elves covered their heads with their arms as they struggled to reach their feet. She dropped her arms, raised her chin, and bellowed, "Kill them all!" The shrouded figures shot into the air anew and rained down magic like I'd never seen. Miniature meteors crashed down. Ice. Holes opened in the ground to suck elves into the earth. One enveloped Brug, then Yakol. His pets dematerialized. Amelia flew from the second story, then crashed on the ground so her body contorted, then broke. Liatra sailed, then slammed into a wall. Samancia's right hand raised his sword, then leapt skyward, prepared to attack one of the shadowy figures who dared to land. But Priya caught him in a wave of energy that lifted him from the ground. Yet two others turned, then unleashed greenish flames that penetrated the elf's armor, glowing so bright I could see his skull as his mouth gaped in pain. All too late, I reached out in an effort to bind Yildren to me, hoping upon hopes we held high enough disposition. Then he exploded. I whipped my head around. Where's Sumi? As luck had it, she stood behind me with her bow poised to unleash an arrow. I reached out, snagged the weapon, then pushed it down. With my body between her and the attackers on the other side of the construct, I reached out with one hand. I have no choice. Death surrounded me, and my sense of mourning as Samancia's favorite advisor and confidant replayed in my head, the failure tearing open a void in my chest when I imagined reporting the loss to her, caused my mind to stutter with the effort of opening Sumi's character sheet. I ground my teeth as a shadow rose from above me and behind me to wash Sumi in an even darker gray than the storm clouds. The tattered tail of the dark figure's robe whipped in the wind and rain. Green light reflected in Sumi's eyes as it prepared to end her as it had Yildren moments earlier. I ground my teeth, focused like my own life depended on it. Then the green fire sailed over me and impacted Sumi. I ticked off points in her strength attribute because I just didn't care where I spent them. A flood of text I'd read too many times to count filled a pain in the center of my HUD as I ticked them off. This bond can only be broken when the non-player... Fuck off! I howled, then spent the final point. Sumi slammed into the wall, and I turned my head away as the green fire enveloped her. Sumi is now your bound companion. Sumi has died. Sumi has returned to your bind point in Brusaria. I dropped to my knees, then huffed with relief. That was going to be one crowded in-room. When I stood, pivoted, and stared out across the Way Portal's arena, elven bodies littered the place in rivers of blood and gore. Then there was me, lone survivor, a target of the king separated from key members of my foundation by a city on high alert. Not Priya strolled across the distance, dividing us, then stopped about 20 feet away. She sneered.
Well, that little crack in the code worked out. Have to leave it to Enora, don't you?
The croaky tenor of that familiar voice sent shivers cascading up and down my spine. The one whose words crept into my mind too many times to count during my time in my new world. But after the portions of the AI's code had been stripped to remove its sentient characteristics, I never thought I'd hear it again. It was the first voice I'd ever heard in Enora. The voice emanating from the hunched woman in a village that never really existed. Lucera, I croaked.
Hello, traitor.
The end. This has been Rebirth, Enora Online 8. Written by Arlo Adams. Narrated by Brian Mesler.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed Rebirth. I'll be publishing Book 9 exclusively to YouTube very soon, and it won't be at Audible, Apple Books, or any of the other retailers, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't by now. Book 10 will be published on Patreon at the same time, but will come to YouTube when Book 9 is finished. Thanks again for listening.